All right, let's talk about the Seattle Seahawks. Now that rookie mini camps, for the most part, across the National Football League are behind us, we can take a step back and look at what coaches are saying and doing to kind of figure out what new additions are really valued extremely highly by different teams, and especially Seattle. And there's one rookie in particular. When you listen to the reports coming out of Seattle and you look at the data, it's very clear the Seahawks think they've got a special playmaker on their roster. We'll get to that in just 1 second. But first, I'm Nick. That's Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, the Seattle Seahawks made shockwaves during day 2 of the NFL draft when they selected quarterback Jaylen Milro from the University of Alabama in the 3rd round, pick number 92. A lot of people looked at Milro and said, well, Mike McDonald's trying to create his Lamar Jackson, right? They've got Sam Darnold, but what are they trying to do here at the quarterback position? They just traded Geno Smith. What's very interesting is that when you go into the reports, it's clear the Seattle Seahawks weren't looking for a quarterback specifically. They were looking for Milro, and that level of specificity leads us to believe that they think he's a special kind of player. Let's get into the reports, and we'll break down some data for you on the other side. This is courtesy of NBC Sports. Yeah, Coach Mike McDonald gave Sam a heads up. Seahawks GM John Schneider said in a recent interview with Rich Eisen. Schneider saying that Mike McDonald called Sam Darnold and said, listen, we're drafting Jaylen Milro, gave him a heads up before they did it, so that way Darnold would not be shocked. It was kind of in that period just coming down the pike like, hey, this isn't about you. This is about, important here, acquiring an impact player, in our opinion. Where's the quarterback stuff go? We don't know how fast. So it's exciting. When you're watching him, and there's a lot of, look, I was blessed to be around Brett Favre. That's a very good comp there, obviously, at a very young age. And there were a lot of wow, and there were a lot of whoa with the throws. And so he's got some of those wows and some of those woes, but then also when he takes off, he's going for 50, 60, 70 yards and running 22 miles an hour with the ball in his hand. So he's a special young man. He's been great so far. All right, the key points of Schneider's commentary there, you can see that when they made the decision to draft Milro based on what they told Sam Darnold, said, listen, we're not going into this draft looking for a quarterback in the 3rd round, and we just felt like we needed one. We really like this guy in particular. We believe Jaylen Milro has a chance to be special. And we talked about a week ago about how the Seahawks are using VR kind of training to really accelerate Milro's development. So it's clear they're incredibly high on this prospect. But the last part of John Schneider's comments are what really stood out to me. The comp to Brett Favre, the wow throws, the big playmaking, right? That's something that a lot of people tend to forget when it comes to the quarterback position. Elite quarterback play in the NFL is no longer like it was in the days of Tom Brady about being efficient, reading the defense, hitting the check down, getting to 3rd and 3. It's about making the plays that break defensive strategies. It's Mahomes' scrambling. It's Lamar Jackson's running. It's Josh Allen's incredible athletic skill set. That elite level talent, the ability to make those big plays, are what give teams an edge and give them a great opportunity to win championships. And when you look at Jaylen Milro's data, it actually gives a strong indication that he was the best quarterback in this class when it came to generating those kind of big plays. So let's go into this chart here to really explain what I'm talking about. So this is big time throw percentage. This is looking at what is qualified by PFF as a big time throw and how many of those big time throws were you able to complete. So let's say you attempted what they call a big time throw, which is a challenging throw, long down the field, intermediate throw, deep into coverage, under pressure, right? PFF has a bunch of different buckets big time throw falls under, but they look at, okay, how many big time throws did you attempt? What is your percentage of completion of those? Or not completion, what is your percentage of the throws that you completed were big time throws? So basically, if you threw the ball 100 times, how many of those throws were big time throws? If you hit the check down 100 times, you'd have 0 big time throws. If you had 100 big time throws attempts out of those 100, you'd have 100%, right? Basic math kind of stuff. So when you look at the numbers here and compare Jaylen Milro to Cam Ward, to Jackson Dart, and Shedeur Sanders, wanted to throw Sanders in there. Of course, he fell to the 4th round, but of course, Dart and Cam Ward were drafted much earlier. You can tell that over the course of their collegiate careers, Jaylen Milro has a better big time throw percentage than all of those guys by a significant margin. He's a little over 6, Jackson Dart right at 6, Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders right around 4%. What does this mean? It means that Jaylen Milro, when he was in the college ranks, had an incredible affinity and a willingness to make those big-time throws and attempt them. He had a lot of that Brett Favre in there. That's not wow. That's not whoa that John Schneider's talking about. And while everyone looks at a guy like, Cam Ward, or look at a guy like Jackson Dart, like the New York Giants did, or even Shedeur Sanders, what people tend to do is they fall in love with a single highlight, right? They sit there and say, oh, look at this incredible scramble, look at this incredible deep ball. And that's phenomenal. Highlights, oh, they make for great TV. We all understand that. But you have to look at the consistency of performance. What quarterback, year in and year out, game in and game out, play in and play out, gives you the best chance to generate these big time plays, these big time throws, because these kind of plays are what separate the good teams from the great teams. Geno Smith was a very good quarterback, undeniably so. He won a lot of football games as a starter for the Seattle Seahawks. But it's very clear he did not have that big time ability. He did not have that Mahomes. He did not have that Matthew Stafford. He did not have that Josh Allen. He did not have that Lamar Jackson. He just didn't. Nothing against him. That's just reality. Jaylen Milro, if you listen to John Schneider and you look at the data, clearly has that ability. And if the Seahawks can develop him, and if Jaylen Milro himself can develop, it's very clear Seattle has himself a legit long-term franchise quarterback who can break those defensive strategies. All right, Miles, I'm curious what your thoughts are on all of this. But first, Seattle fans, 12s, in the comment section below. Look, of all of the new additions to Seattle when it comes to rookies, whether it's the draft picks or undrafted free agents, what's one guy that's sliding under the radar that you think will have a big impact for the Seattle Seahawks very early in his career, right? There's a lot of big names, of course. Zabel's a guy floating around, of course. Milro, we talked about him, of course, today. But what's maybe another guy that's kind of sliding under the radar that you think will have a massive impact? Give us that guy in the comment section below. But, Miles, I will throw it over to you now. What are your thoughts on John Schneider's comments and just how much the Seattle Seahawks clearly are really impressed by Jaylen Milro?
Yeah, Nick, I think it's the overarching theme of this team, and we can see how they've structured the team this whole offseason as far as how they've built it, how they've structured it. Is the Seahawks used to be kind of one dimensional, like you said, with Geno Smith. The only game breaking player they had, so to speak, was the speed of DK Metcalf on the outside, which, quite honestly, when you have a receiver and they're quick, it's kind of easy to shut them down or at least slow them down if you double cover them, if you put a safety over the top of your corner to give them help. It's easy to game plan for stuff like that. But if you shift, which they did by trading DK Metcalf, and you're able to bring in a game breaking player at the quarterback position, it is extremely difficult, dare say impossible, to game plan for everything they can bring to the table, especially when you talk about a guy like Jaylen Milro, who obviously can make big plays with his legs, but as you allude to with the chart here, he can make big throws with his arm as well. So when you have a guy at the quarterback position, which Mike Macdonald with Lamar Jackson, very familiar with this strategy, I think you can get an idea of, at the time, controversially trading DK Metcalf, but you can get an idea of what they wanted with this team. Let's go away from one-dimensional dynamicism. Let's go back to a team there's maybe a little bit more balance, a little bit more talent spread out across the whole thing. But now we have a guy at the center of the team that can do multiple different things dynamically and really bring a lot to the table when it comes to that aspect. But also through the draft, they added some nice playmakers. I think that is going to help out a guy like Jaylen Milro in the future. Elijah Arroyo, the tight end from Miami, I think he's going to be a very interesting piece here. Again, Ravens theme, having two great pass catching tight ends. Baltimore had Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely. That's something that can kind of break up a defense a little bit, covering two tight ends with somebody that is either big enough, like a linebacker, that can cover, or someone in a corner is a little bit outmatched size wise against a tight end. There's a lot of stuff that you can do with a good two tight end sets when you have two tight ends that are more like wide receivers. Very interesting thing there. Then again, at the running back position, a guy we really love that they picked up, Damian Martinez, again from Miami, a guy that's a game breaker, a really strong playmaker, and can add a lot to this offensive side of the ball. So I think Seattle, they're going for a new approach. They didn't want all the star power at wide receiver. They didn't want their game plan to run through the wide receiver position. They pivoted and they wanted it to now run through the quarterback and have the quarterback be the spark of the offense. Very successful. Like you said, all of the teams that you named, Buffalo's offense runs through Josh Allen. The Chiefs' offense runs through Patrick Mahomes. Name a player on the Chiefs that's even close to the level of playmaking ability that Patrick Mahomes has. You look at, what the Baltimore Ravens did, it clearly runs through Lamar Jackson. So this is a team now that's focused from wide receiver centric dynamicism, having DK Metcalf be the guy you want to go through, to now the quarterback being the guy that you want to focus on. I really like this play by Seattle, and I think it's going to help them out a lot in the coming years once Jaylen Milro becomes a starter.
Yeah, you bring up an absolutely perfect point there. I think one way I like to describe it is, are you going to be an infrastructure focused team or are you going to be a quarterback focused team, right? There's basically two different ways to skin that cat. You can be like the 49ers, who, for the better part of the last half decade with Brock Purdy, who now they've had to give him a lot of money. So they're going to have to totally shift. But before they gave Purdy this recent mega deal, they were an infrastructure focused team, right? Purdy was Mr. Irrelevant. He was incredibly cheap, traded for McCaffrey, drafted all these running backs, Kittle, Samuel, all these different receivers, all these offensive linemen. They were 100% focused on the infrastructure. And they were probably the best example. They were the perfect team in terms of the most success and the best well done job executing that strategy. And they got 0 Super Bowl titles, right? Now, they obviously went to a couple Super Bowls, so that nothing against them. They went to, a couple of the conference championship games as well. So they had an incredibly good run. That's undeniable. But the reality is they got stopped short of the championship. The infrastructure strategy doesn't work, even if you execute it perfectly. And I think that to me is an indication of whether a plan is a good plan or not. If it goes absolutely perfectly, which for the 49ers it did, and you still don't win a championship, to me that means there's some flaws in the plan. And if you look at the quarterback centric approach, like what you mentioned, we've seen this from Mahomes. We've seen this, obviously Mahomes being the prominent example because he's won a lot of Super Bowls over the past half decade, but we've seen that example work, and we've seen that example work in the past as well. So when I look at the quarterback centric approach, I think it's clearly the most likely model to lead to championships. Now, obviously, it's not guaranteed, but I think that's the right approach to take. Now, when it comes to Jaylen Milro specifically, a lot of the question marks and concerns were, well, last season he threw a lot more interceptions and his numbers dipped a little bit, right? But if you look at what Alabama had to go through last season, changed the entire coaching staff, new strategy, new transfers, all this kind of stuff, a lot of volatility. That's going to happen anytime you have a quarterback, right? You're stuck with the system for a number of years. You change it all. There's going to be some bumps and bruises along the way. And by the way, Patrick Mahomes himself was not immune to turnovers in college. In fact, he threw 25 interceptions his final 2 seasons at Texas Tech. Josh Allen at Wyoming had a lot of turnovers, a lot of inaccurate throws. Now, look, is Jaylen Milro as physically gifted coming out of college as Allen or Mahomes? I don't think so. Or you can throw Lamar Jackson in that mix as well. No, of course not. But let's not bury a kid, as some people like to do in the national media, for having a down season, so to speak, where he throws a few more interceptions just because he had the entire offensive structure and a lot of the players change around him after being in a certain system for a number of years, right? One of the things that quarterbacks thrive in, and it's a cliche, but it's true, is consistency. We see a lot of quarterback busts that go on to the NFL. What happens that make them a bust is they have the old 5 offensive coordinators in 6 years graphic. They show up on the broadcast, right? Consistency breeds quarterback growth and development. Volatility in terms of in terms of the play callers and things like that around him will lead to some concerns. And Jaylen Milro had some volatility in college his last year. His numbers dipped. That's what's to be expected. But that doesn't mean he's still not an elite prospect. And I think the Seattle Seahawks getting him where they got him was an incredible value at the time. And now that you listen to why the Seattle Seahawks value him so much and that they compare him literally to Brett Favre, right? Schneider said, listen, this is a guy that reminds me of Favre. I was there with Favre. There's a lot of wow here. In fact, Milro's got that same level of wow throws, plus he's a much better runner. That is an incredibly good comp because Brett Favre, if you go back to that era, Favre and a little before him, John Elway, they were sort of the first quarterbacks, Randall Cunningham, throw him in that mix too, that were breaking the defensive mold with just their sheer athletic talent, right? They're kind of the pre-Mahomes, the pre-Josh Allen, right? The pre-Matthew Stafford that we see in the NFL today. And I think Milro, again, Milro's compared to like guys like Lamar Jackson, but I think Schneider looks at him and says, yeah, I think he has that same focus as Brett, or same comp as Brett Favre, same kind of effect, I should say, as Favre. To me, that's an indication that every single person in the Seattle organization, old, young, and in between, says Milro is a guy who can and will break defensive rules. And these are the guys that can push you to championships like we mentioned before. Now, look, we get it. It's early. There's a lot of things to go, right? Got to work our way through training camp and preseason. But it's very clear the Seattle Seahawks did not go into the 3rd round or any part of the draft thinking we need to draft a quarterback. We need to find a quarterback. It's very clear they came into the draft saying, we like Jaylen Milro, and what they've done since. We talked about the VR training in our last Seahawks video, all these different reports that are coming out. They highly value this prospect. They think he has a chance to be a special player and their long-term answer at the quarterback position.